What's going on, everybody? Shonen Express here, coming to you with another Return to Sender video. This time, it is on one of my favorite manga, Time Paradox Ghostwriter. I will say from the very beginning that Time Paradox Ghostwriter is one of my favorite manga in recent Jump. This will obviously give me a bias for this series, but I tried to look objectively at what happened to this series as much as I could. This video format will be a little different than the former Return to Sender videos that I have produced in the past. In this video, I will go over and review the series in depth, and then we will look at why the series ended as early as it did, and what we can learn from that. I would like to break down this review into 4 distinct categories, the first of which will be the characters. Now, within each of these 4 categories, I want to talk about some of the pros and some of the cons so that we have kind of a balanced view of what's going on in this manga. So, first of all, we have to start with the main character, Teppei Sasaki. Sasaki is a 24-year-old man who is trying to make a name for himself in the manga industry, specifically trying to get published in Weekly Shonen Jump. He has been unsuccessful and seems to be a rather uninspired writer. One of the things that I think stands out about Sasaki is his unending drive to accomplish this dream of his. I like seeing main characters who want something badly, and Sasaki definitely fits that mold. He also questions the status quo of the manga industry by wanting to draw something that can appeal to everyone. This gives Sasaki a very real and, in my opinion, cool feel. Once he begins receiving White Knight, we get to see a new and more interesting version of what his character is. At first, he is super reluctant to use the new manga and essentially plagiarize another person's work just for his own benefit. His struggle with himself to create a manga that is of the same caliber as the future White Knight is super interesting. All things considered, Sasaki is a super interesting character that I really enjoy seeing. We also need to talk about the main heroine of the story, Itsuki Aino. She doesn't necessarily play a huge part in the story, but her character is well defined in my opinion. She acts like a recluse or shut-in would, especially with her absolute love of manga. It is super consistent that she would overwork herself based on what we see of her character throughout the manga. Unfortunately, though, this is where our pro-character comments come to an end, and we need to look at what Time Paradox Ghostwriter did incorrectly in this department. The rest of the cast, apart from the main 2 characters, may as well be just random stand-in characters. Most of them get absolutely no time to shine or really time for us to even know what they're about. I have highlighted here 3 characters where this is extremely egregious. The first editor Sasaki has seems to be a very self-centered and short-sighted person, but we don't get to see any more of that or any more development in that character because he almost immediately is shoved out of the manga. The same is true on the opposite end with the editor-in-chief, who seems like an extremely interesting character, but he just gets shoved out of the manga almost immediately and we never see him again. These 2 characters could provide an interesting background and conflict for Sasaki, but don't because we never hear from them again. Maybe the most egregious example of characters not being used correctly is who I'm going to refer to as Mirai, the toy robot that is trying to save Itsuki. There is zero characterization in what is clearly a human character of some kind. We will discuss later the problems that this causes for this manga, but the fact that what seems like such an influential position is not discussed at all is a big negative for the series. With that, we will move on to the artwork. Art is a huge part of manga, and at least for me, can make or break a story. If the art isn't drawn in such a way that I can understand what you're communicating, I'm going to have a much harder time being drawn to your story, no matter how good the writing is. Luckily, for Time Paradox Ghostwriter, the art is incredible. There's an amazing level of detail in the way that the artist draws everything in this manga. Everything is very clean and neat, which is something that I personally prefer, but beyond that, the art conveys exactly what emotion the characters are feeling. Not only that, but all the characters have appealing designs, despite the fact that they are just ordinary people. Sasaki, I think, stands out from the crowd enough to make sure that we know he's the main character, but at the same time, we believe that he could be a normal guy. When he's having an emotional breakdown, his facial expressions are able to convey exactly how much pain he is in. I think the greatest example of how good this artwork is when he has to convey that the characters are overworked. Slight details we see with Sasaki and Itsuki convey exactly how hard they each have worked on their individual manga. All of these things put together make the artwork a solid pro for Time Paradox Ghostwriter. The next section I'm going to call the mechanics of the show. Normally, what I'll mean by this is the power system and the setting of that individual series. However, this manga does not have a power system, so to speak, but there is supernatural phenomena. So, I would like to talk about the mechanics of the time travel that goes on in this manga. I like that time travel is the premise of this manga. It is a difficult premise to work with, but it is always unique and interesting to me, and so I enjoyed that. I also like the specifics of a future version of Shonen Jump materializing in the microwave. I thought that was very interesting. This is a new and interesting way to view time travel, and it was something that I really liked. However, I will admit that most of the mechanics in this story serve to help Sasaki accomplish what he needs to accomplish. Not only that, but time-traveling mechanics, along with the eventual time-stopping mechanics, are not explained at all, and we have no idea why these things are allowed to happen. They just happen. This leaves us with a ton of questions as to how this world works. Is there something specific in whoever's controlling Mirai the robot that allows time to be manipulated, or some other factor at play? And how is it that they know if Itsuki is alive or dead in the future, as well as in the current timeline? All of these things raise a lot of questions about the mechanics of how Time Paradox Ghostwriter's time travel works, and it definitely leaves an overall bad taste in my mouth as to how they handled the mechanics. This brings us to our fourth and final category, namely the plot. Now, this is debatably the most important category within any manga, but I would say especially as regards this manga, it is the most important thing to consider. So we will start with the prose, as I have before, and one of the best things I think about this manga is that when I was reading it week to week, there was a major twist at the end of almost every single chapter. This made it extremely easy to read every week, and on top of that, it made me excited to see what the next chapter had. These twists, while super common, were never unwelcome, and it was always something unexpected and super cool. Another part of the plot that I think is extremely enticing is the amount of guilt that we see Sasaki deal with. He is obviously doing something that is not morally permissible. Plagiarizing is never okay. However, the amount that he agonizes over this shows us that he really doesn't want to plagiarize. On top of that, it's been stated later that all of the money he's making from this, he intends to give back to Itsuki once the manga ends. He is driven by allowing White Knight to exist in this world, and this would not be possible if he didn't do it the way he did. Not only is Sasaki's journey worth watching, but specifically the moral of this story I think is really interesting and really unique. As someone who really enjoys reading manga and has been a lifelong fan of Shonen Jump, I'm familiar with what good manga have in common. At least a little bit, I'd like to think. All throughout this manga, they tell Sasaki to write something unique, something that only he could draw. And all throughout this manga, both him and Itsuki say that that's not what they want to do. They want to draw something for all of humanity. This ideal we see ends up writing Itsuki to her death, and thus we see it's certainly not worth it. However, what I think is the most interesting aspect of this story is how Sasaki rectifies this problem. Sasaki ends up drawing the greatest manga ever, because he had an infinite amount of time to produce it. He then gives it to Itsuki, who reads it and says, "This is the best. This is a manga that will appeal to all of humanity. I know it, and I can't top it, so I won't try." This was Sasaki's intent all along, but what he says next is the most important aspect. He says that this was a manga written for her, that he put all his effort not to pleasing all of humanity, but to pleasing just her, and by making it so specific, he could create the perfect manga, but one that would only be so for her. This takes the trope of drawing something only you can draw and takes it to the next level in saying that it is only when you focus in on a specific demographic or constrain the story in some way can you really truly create something that will speak to people on a deep level. For more than just manga, this is true for all works of fiction, and is a really cool thing to see in a weekly Shonen Jump manga. Unfortunately, the plot was not just full of amazing things. As I said before, the stuff with Mirai the robot was super confusing and not explained at all. Who was the robot and how are they affecting the world are questions that we will never have the answer to. It's possible that the author was trying to allude to himself and saying that he was saving Itsuki from outside of the story. However, this is a very sketchy idea and one that I don't really like all that much. And possibly most importantly, this story deals with plagiarizing, something that is very illegal and very morally wrong. And while I think that this manga does a good job of illustrating that this is not a good idea, at the same time, I do understand those that are principally against it because it could possibly promote the idea of plagiarizing. All these things put together, however, still leave me with a great impression of the plot of Time Paradox Ghostwriter. So, with all that out of the way, what happened? At the end of the day, this is a return to sender video, so this manga got canceled, and in fact, it got canceled after just 14 chapters. What on earth could have happened to make this, what is in my opinion, such a great manga, get canceled so quickly? At first, I wondered if it wasn't intentional. Did the author and illustrator just want the manga to end in a very short period of time? Unfortunately, I found out that the answer was no. This manga was canceled very intentionally. Despite the success it may have found throughout the rest of the world, Time Paradox Ghostwriter was extremely unpopular with the residents of Japan. The manga industry in Japan is way bigger than anywhere else in the world, and as a consequence of that, they take plagiarizing very seriously. It seemed to be the common consensus among Japanese readers that it was not okay to even fabricate the idea that a plagiarizing story would be okay. It also seems like Sasaki was not very enticing to most Japanese readers, as a lot of the negative comments about this manga are specifically about his character, and how they don't believe him that he is really guilt-ridden. This in turn clearly led to bad reader surveys that clearly made the magazine decide to cut Time Paradox Ghostwriter before its time. I believe it was as early as chapter 6 when they were given notice that they could be canceled. It was at this point that the story began to speed ahead and not take the time that it had for the first 5 chapters. This makes me think that the author was notified this manga could be ending shortly and is doing his best to wrap up his story as quickly and as concisely as he could. But despite his best efforts, the manga would still end after only 14 chapters in the magazine. So, all things considered, I personally believe that Time Paradox Ghostwriter is one of the best manga that I've ever read. I think the way that the author was able to wrap up the story was incredibly good, especially considering the short time frame that he had. On top of that, I hope that both the writer and illustrator of this manga can learn some of the more minute ins and outs of the Japanese audience, specifically so they don't end up with another story like this that gets canceled. However, I have faith in both the writer and the illustrator, seeing as I really enjoyed both of their work on this series. So, something that I want to do a little differently with these reviews or these special deliveries, or my return to sender videos, is I'm going to put all of the manga that I finished on my tier list. Now, I have a full list of my anime and manga tier list that I keep, saved onto my laptop, but I've put here just the ones that I've already done either a review or a return to sender video on, so you can see them there. To go over kind of the ranks, just so we're all clear, E rank are things that I think are terrible. I hated them, they were no good. D rank is things that I just think were bad, right? I didn't like them. C rank is things that I think were good. I liked them. They it's in the plus category. B rank are series that I think are great, and they deserve recognition for that. A rank, I think, are stories that I feel are nearly perfect. They are so close to being my perfect series. And S rank are things that I call it S for what I'll say is sublime. They're things that have affected me in a way that is far greater than a simple story has. So these are things that have really impacted my life in a huge way. So as you see, we don't have any S's and we don't have any A's, but I am putting Time Paradox Ghostwriter at A. I think this is a nearly perfect manga, and it is by far the shortest manga in my A tier. On my tier list, but you can see all of them, all the ones I've already done there, ranked, kind of based on how I feel about them. So yeah, so I'm gonna probably, we're gonna slowly add to this tier list as I make more of these videos. So look forward to that as it goes. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have anything to say, you liked anything I had to say, please like the video. Leave a comment down in the comment section. I'd love to talk to you about Time Paradox Ghostwriter, about any of my other things on the tier list. I'd love to chat with you in the comment section there. But yeah, subscribe to the channel. I bring you weekly newsletters on Weekly Shonen Jump every single week, as well as these special videos that I'm trying to get more consistent with pumping out. So definitely subscribe to the channel, like the video, and until next time, this is Shonen Express, signing off.